Good afternoon, and welcome to All Brothers No More, the challenge of autonomous technology. In this breakout session, we will discuss the ethics of war and technology and what is the appropriate Catholic response to lethal autonomous weapons systems. My name is Ryan DeCorpo. I am a frequent contributor to America Magazine and a member of the Pax Christi USA Young Adult Caucus.
And I'm Pierre Thompson. I am the regional representative for Pax Christi Northern California, and also a project consultant for the Campaign to Stop Killer Robots.
Pax Christi USA, the organization we both represent today, is a Catholic peace and justice movement that seeks to model the peace of Christ and a witness to the mandate of nonviolence, the nonviolence of the cross. We reject war, preparation for war, every form of violence and domination, and personal and systemic racism. The icon you see on your screen represents the story of Jacob and Esau, the fraternal twin brothers and sons of Isaac and Rebekah, who became enemies when Esau sold his birthright. This story shows the reconciliation between Esau and Jacob and provides a good framework for discussion of nonviolence we will undertake today. You can see the ethic of the fraternal encounter in that icon and the trampling of the sword. Fratelli Tutti, the Pope's newest encyclical, will also be discussed at some length today. And the encyclical ends with two prayers, which we'd like to begin with one of today. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Amen. This is called a prayer to the Creator. Lord, Father of our human family, you created all human beings equal in dignity. Pour forth into our hearts a fraternal spirit and inspire in us a dream of renewed encounter, dialogue, justice, and peace. Move us to create healthier societies and a more dignified world, a world without hunger, poverty, violence, and war. Amen.
So two major events happened in Assisi this month. The first of which Ryan referred to, which was Pope Francis's newest encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, on fraternity and social friendship. And this encyclical is a really important contribution to church teaching. It provides a structural analysis of violence at all levels of human society, which it ties to the problem of us not being able to see each other as members of the same human family or even neighbors. And Francis, in this encyclical, provides a blueprint for Catholic peace building that is really based on promoting a culture of encounter between human beings, which also entails dialogue, forgiveness, and reconciliation. The second event in Assisi happened about a week later with the beatification of Carlos Acuti, who was an Italian teenager who probably will be canonized someday as the first saint of the millennial generation. It's fitting because as a computer programmer, many people saw him as a model of how young people can use technology at the service of the gospel to reach as many people as possible and help them know the beauty of friendship with the Lord. Now, I think these two themes of fraternity and technology are actually closely related. About 2 years ago, Pope Francis said, AI, robotics, and other technological innovations must be so employed that they contribute to the service of humanity and to protection of our common home, rather than to the contrary. And I think it's fair to say that the Catholic peace movement, at least in this country, has focused a lot on opposing existing weapons technology, but maybe hasn't spent as much time opposing the development of new and emerging technologies that also threaten the character of how we relate to each other. And perhaps in a way, this is not surprising because the United States is certainly a technological society, and our lives and our perspectives are highly conditioned by the technological paradigm, which is hard to break out of. And I think as young adults, especially, we have a responsibility to be attentive to these new developments, not to be complicit with them. And so in this presentation today, I hope that we'll be able to not only break down some of the structural causes of the malicious use of this autonomous technology, but also to build up an ethics of fraternity and a framework for action. So we offer you these three guiding questions today. One, how can we navigate the tension between our society's technological evolution and its ethical evolution? Two, how does autonomous technology challenge our ability to build an ethics of fraternity and a culture of encounter with other human beings, especially our enemies? And three, how can we as Catholics avoid complicity with or indifference to the malicious development of autonomous technology by US companies, universities, and the military? Now, the Pontifical Academy for Life has described a fundamental difference between human beings and machines in terms of our embodiment, our agency, and our intelligence. So human beings obviously have bodies, which put us in relationship with the environment and with each other. We're created with free will, and we have a moral responsibility for the actions that we undertake. And our human intelligence is a creative intelligence that comes from a process of experience, understanding, and judging. Machines don't really have these attributes. They have sensors, processors, and effectors to interact with the environment. Their behavior is based on algorithms that are actually created by, at least originally, by human beings. And artificial intelligence really is a narrow form of intelligence that is based on mathematical and statistical models, which I'll talk about in the next slide. So I think it's fair to say that in my lifetime, we've seen artificial intelligence begin to overtake human performance in many narrowly defined areas. So in the digital realm, for example, I want to share two examples. The first is something you've probably all encountered, CAPTCHAs, which are basically automated tests to tell computers and humans apart. And artificial intelligence has become so adept at recognizing images and properly classifying them that if you're like me, it often takes several tries with the CAPTCHA before you can beat the machine. So this is an example of where human beings are behind computers. The second example on the right is a bot, which I'm sure you've also encountered. These are automated digital robots on the internet. And in this example, Pope Francis tweets, "Good luck to the athletes at Rio 2016." And moments later, a bot tweets back, "At Pontifex, please refrain from using Rio 2016. This is a violation of the Olympic brand." And there are other similar algorithms that are used to rapidly detect fraud on your credit card or to filter out spam. And nobody would contest that these technologies are helpful. But you can also imagine on Twitter the use of bots to undermine public trust and to spread misinformation, which is much more insidious than the examples I've described. So if we turn now to the physical world, AI is starting to interact with rapid developments in robotics. This is driven by largely three things: the rapid improvement of computational power, or Moore's law, the increased amount of data that's available for AI to analyze, largely through the internet and the Internet of Things, and finally, the development of new and advanced algorithms to train machine learning. So the CAPTCHAs, for example, every time you submit those, they increase the amount of information that the machine has to recognize images. And there's a really interesting example of autonomous vehicles. because these are vehicles that can recognize images, but they also navigate through a physical landscape, and in some cases can cause great harm, or provide safety, depending on how well they're programmed, to the human beings in the environment. And I think we can use this example also to understand that there are different levels of human supervision with respect to the machine. So, on the one hand, you might have a human being physically sitting behind the wheel who's able to take over if something wrong happens with the program. On the other hand, you can think of a human being just turning a car or a truck on and asking it to get to its destination, but is no longer involved in the process of driving, and is, in a sense, maybe no longer sees himself or herself as responsible for any accidents that might take place. Now, if we turn to the area of warfare, the US Department of Defense has been very interested in utilizing artificial intelligence in its weapon systems for some of the reasons that I've hinted at. Um, the US Department of Defense defines an autonomous weapon system as one that, once activated, can select and engage targets without intervention by a human operator. And some examples of AI-enabled weapon systems include loitering munitions, autonomous armed ships, and anti-ballistic missile defense systems, unmanned aerial vehicles, also known as drones, which have been widely used for targeted killings, and hypersonic weapons that can uh, travel much faster than the speed of sound and follow an irregular flight path to its target. And I think the trend that we see here in military doctrine is really towards decreasing the role and the presence of human soldiers on the battlefield, because this, in a way, makes it easier to uh, carry out the killing, which often has psychological implications for the combatants. And one risk that also comes with autonomous weapons is the risk that robots will be directed to targeted killings. In fact, in Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis writes that violence has become so common as to constitute almost a third world war fought piecemeal. I want to share the example of an assassination attempt on the Venezuelan president Nicolas Maduro, where it was found that a drone that was commercially obtained for about $5,000 was loaded with several pounds of explosives. And it was an unsuccessful assassination attempt. But what it shows is really how easy it would become for human beings to obtain this kind of technology. And once it's fully automated, to even step back and say, I was not responsible for killing this individual. It was the machine that did it. And now I'd
Thank
like to
oh,
now I'd like to turn it back to you, Ryan.
thank you, Pierre. In this next part of the presentation, I will address the rise of these new military technologies from a Catholic moral and social justice perspective. As referenced, the recent papal encyclical Fratelli Tutti reflects on both the problems of war in the modern age and the inviolable dignity of all human persons. I'd like to begin with reading and offering reflections on some excerpts from Fratelli Tutti regarding our moral responsibility as informed Catholics. Later, we will examine earlier church documents, Gaudium et Spes and the Challenge of Peace, for a deeper understanding of the Catholic response to war and the buildup of lethal weapon systems. In Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis asks if the creation of new weapons for war has set the stage for what he calls, quote, an uncontrollable destructive power over great numbers of innocent civilians. In light of the awesome violence man is now capable of perpetrating, and the threat of endangering all life on Earth through the wanton use of nuclear weapons, the Pope questions the viability of the Catholic just war tradition, which for centuries has provided set criteria for justifying armed conflict. The Pope writes, quote, "We can no longer think of war as a solution because its risk will probably always be greater than its supposed benefits. In view of this, it is very difficult nowadays to invoke the rational criteria elaborated in earlier centuries to speak of the possibility of a just war. Never again war." This final exclamation echoes the words of Pope St. John Paul II in 2003, quote, "No to war. War is not always inevitable. It is always a defeat for humanity," he said in opposition to the war in Iraq. Pope Francis also criticizes expenditures on weapon systems, suggesting the creation of a global hunger fund to put that same money to better, more humane use. The United States in particular has seen a dangerous rise in defense spending over the past several years. This February, President Trump proposed a $740.5 billion national security budget. Last April, the Washington Post reported that U.S. military spending was expected to increase for a fifth consecutive year, thereby approaching Iraq War-era expenditures. Never again war. Pope Francis advocates for a new style of politics, built upon charity towards others and a focus on those experiencing the greatest needs. He stresses the importance of a gaze, of a look that, quote, "can enable the dignity of others to be recognized," and that rejects the means of what he terms soulless pragmatism. Lethal autonomous weapon systems, by their nature, deprive us of this gaze in a very real way, robbing us of human contact in favor of technological efficiency. New biological, chemical, and nuclear weapons give nations the power to eliminate its political enemies without meeting them in a face-to-face encounter. I'm reminded of the thought of the French philosopher Emmanuel Levinas, who in 1961 wrote that the face, in its nudity and defenselessness, signifies "do not kill me." In Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis writes that it is an encounter with others that reminds us of our shared humanity. In this sense, technology can be used for good, to connect people all over the world and promote the cause of social friendship, the subject of this most recent encyclical. Catholic opposition to war and to the use of lethal autonomous weapon systems stems from the Church's teachings on human dignity. The Pope is clear in his new encyclical, quote, "Every human being has the right to live with dignity and to develop integrally. This fundamental right cannot be denied by any country." For precedent, let us now turn to Gaudium et Spes, the pastoral constitution on the Church in the modern world, promulgated by Pope St. Paul VI in 1965. Addressing issues of human dignity and the ever-present threat of war, this document, the fruit of the Second Vatican Council, states that, quote, "the root reason for human dignity lies in man's call to communion with God." We must always remember that all persons are fashioned in the image and likeness of the Creator. This truth led former Chicago Archbishop Joseph Cardinal Bernardine to remark in a June 1984 address that, quote, "to lay violent hands upon the person is to come as close as can be to laying violent hands on God." Although promulgated over 4 decades ago, Gaudium et Spes addresses concerns raised by the prospect of new weapons technologies. Quote, "the horror and perversity of war is immensely magnified by the addition of scientific weapons," reads the document, which states that the massive devastation made possible by these weapons belie any justification of such tools for purposes of national defense. Instead of fostering a false peace rooted in deterrence and maintained by the threat of violence or mass extermination, Gaudium et Spes reminds us that we must turn our efforts towards seeking a legitimate and lasting peace. The document states that peace, quote, "must be born of mutual trust between nations and not be imposed on them through a fear of nuclear weapons, of available weapons." The 1983 pastoral letter, "The Challenge of Peace, God's Promise and Our Response," affirms the role of the Church in working for peace. Quote, "building peace within and among nations is the work of many individuals and institutions," writes the National Conference of Catholic Bishops. Quote, "We believe that the Church, as a community of faith and social institution, has a proper, necessary, and distinctive part to play in the pursuit of peace." This charge poses important questions for the faithful. What is our role in advocating for peace? How can we use our unique gifts to work for nonviolent solutions to conflict? How can we be a living witness to the inherent dignity of all human persons? In this next section, we will propose an education and advocacy framework for addressing these weapon systems. Pierre?
Thanks, Ryan. As Catholics, I think we should be aware that the Catholic Church has, in fact, been at the forefront of efforts to retain meaningful human control over the use of force. And it largely sees this in terms of the question of human dignity that Ryan has brought up. Just last month, Pope Francis used his address to the UN General Assembly to talk about the Church's position on autonomous weapons.
We need to break the climate of mistrust that exists. We are seeing an erosion of multilateralism. This is even more serious in the light of the development of new forms of military technology, such as, for instance, lethal autonomous weapons systems, which are irreversibly changing the nature of war, separating it even further from human action. The perverse logic that links the possession of weapons to human and personal security must be dismantled. This logic only serves to increase the profits of the industry of war. It fosters a climate of mistrust and fear between peoples.
Okay, so one of the ways that the Holy See has been seeking to control this technology at the international level has been through promoting or advocating for a legally binding instrument on lethal autonomous weapons, particularly their development, production, testing, and use. A lot of this action has happened in the framework of the UN's Convention on Conventional Weapons. And I think it's interesting that Pope Francis, in his encyclical Fratelli Tutti, also talks about the importance of civil society in terms of stepping up to complement the role of states and the international system when it comes to advocating for things like a ban. Now, there are some people who think that a ban on lethal autonomous weapons might not be effective, particularly when you have countries like the United States, China, and Russia already rushing in a technological arms race to develop these weapons. And so this leads to another strategy that the Catholic Church and the Pontifical Academy of Life has also promoted, which is to ensure that the development of algorithms meets the fundamental condition of freedom and dignity. So earlier this year, the Pontifical Academy for Life put out its Rome Call for AI Ethics, which was signed by a number of governments and large companies, including Microsoft and IBM. And some of the ethical principles that they are asking computer programmers to be mindful of include transparency, inclusion, responsibility, impartiality, reliability, security, and privacy. And we've included this document for your review.
Thank you, Pierre. Before we move on to our question and answer portion of this presentation, we'd like to propose some action points. 1, to raise awareness about laws at the parish or diocesan level with Catholic leaders in government and industry, using relevant themes and principles from Catholic social teaching to describe the problem and arrive at solutions. 2, identify a local company or university, perhaps the university you are attending or will attend, that contracts with the military to carry out AI research and development, and invite the principal investigator to reconsider the terms and objectives of such research. 3, promote legal and normative frameworks that support the good innovation of AI, including the Rome Call for AI Ethics, as we saw on the previous slide, and a legally binding instrument on laws. And 4, to initiate dialogue between theologians, ethicists, scientists, engineers, and technologists on establishing intermediate social bodies that can incorporate and express the ethical sensibilities of users and educators.
So we want to thank all of you for tuning into this presentation, and we'd like to use the remainder of our time to have a conversation with you and answer any questions.